This ID expired 10 years ago. Grandpa. Can't you hear me? The officer laughed, holding up the weathered military badge. The deaf veteran remained silent, watching. But when he made one quiet phone call from the corner bench, everything changed. The Pentagon was waiting. Tuesday mornings at the Riverside County DMV were always the same, a sea of impatient faces, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like nervous sentinels, the constant electronic chime announcing each new number. Today was no different. Q127, Windows 6. Next customer, please. The air hung heavy with collective frustration. Parents juggled restless children. Teenagers scrolled endlessly on phones. Workers watched the clock calculating minutes lost from precious lunch breaks. In the far corner, an elderly man approached Windows 6 with measured steps. Unlike the disheveled crowd, he stood apart. Silver hair precisely combed, charcoal gray suit with subtle military precision, pressed gray trousers with razor-sharp creases. His posture remained ramrod straight, despite his 75 years, though his scarred fingers occasionally flexed at his side, remnants of something the casual observer wouldn't understand. General Thomas Mitchell, retired, reached Windows 6 and nodded politely. He pulled out a small notepad and wrote in precise block letters, "Good morning. I need to renew my identification, please." He slid the notepad across the counter, his piercing blue eyes meeting the clerk's with calm intensity. Melissa Chun, 3 months into her DMV position, and already numb from repetition, barely looked up. "License or state ID?" she asked automatically. The general pointed to his ear and shook his head slightly, then gestured to the notepad. Melissa glanced down, noticing his note. "Oh," she muttered, embarrassed. "License or state ID?" she repeated, this time writing it down. Mitchell shook his head again and placed something on the counter between them. Melissa glanced down, expecting the usual driver's license. Instead, she saw a military identification card unlike any she processed before. Faded blue with unusual markings and security features she didn't recognize. "Sir, this expired in 2012, she said automatically, then immediately realized her mistake. She quickly wrote it down and pushed the notepad back. The general read her note and nodded, writing, "I understand. I'm here to renew it." Melissa frowned, fingers hovering over her keyboard. The protocol for expired military IDs existed, but this one didn't match any template in her training. She raised her hand, signaling her supervisor. "Problem?" Carlos Delgado asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Unusual military ID, expired a decade ago. And..." She lowered her voice. "He's deaf or something." Carlos examined the card with growing skepticism. He gestured toward Officer Mark Reeves, the uniformed security officer stationed nearby. "Everything all right?" Reeves asked, approaching the window with casual authority. At 28, with 3 years on security force, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who enjoyed the minor power his position afforded. "This gentleman is trying to renew a military ID," Carlos explained, handing the card to Reeves. "He can't hear or speak." Officer Reeves turned the ID in his hands, amusement spreading across his face. He spoke loudly and deliberately, as if volume could overcome deafness. "This a joke?" he asked, grinning and holding the ID up. "Looks like it came out of a cereal box." General Mitchell's weathered face remained impassive. He reached for his notepad again, but Reeves continued before he could write. "This ID expired 10 years ago. That's your retirement card, Grandpa? Can't you hear me?" Reeves laughed, tapping his own ear mockingly. The general didn't flinch. He simply wrote, "It's real. I'd like it renewed." "Sure, Grandpa. So Santa Claus is real too?" Reeves chuckled, showing the card to another employee who smirked in response. "Look at this thing. Probably printed it at home." He handed the ID back dismissively. "Try the VA or something. This isn't even a standard military identification." The general accepted his card without comment, tucked it carefully into an inner pocket, and stepped aside. No argument, no protest. Simply a slight nod before moving to a bench against the far wall. There he sat perfectly still, removed a vintage military-style secure phone from his suit, and unfolded a small piece of paper containing a single handwritten number. No area code, no name beside it, just 12 digits that hadn't changed in 30 years. A young mother in line whispered to her husband, "Why is that officer being so rude? The poor man can't even hear him." Her husband shrugged. Some people get a little power and forget themselves. Officer Reeves overheard and stiffened. "Ma'am, we have procedures. That ID is clearly fake. People try to scam government benefits all the time." Meanwhile, the general dialed methodically, each number pressed with deliberate precision. His expression remained unchanged, years of covert operations having trained him to reveal nothing, even when insulted or underestimated. Several customers shifted uncomfortably, witnessing the dismissive treatment. An elderly veteran in line removed his service cap out of instinctive respect, recognizing something in the general's bearing that the younger officer had missed entirely. From his seat, General Mitchell could read lips well enough to understand a continued mockery. He had survived worse in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He had endured torture, isolation, and loss. A young officer's disrespect barely registered, except as a teaching opportunity. The phone rang once before connecting with a soft click. Pentagon switchboard. Clearance code. The female voice was crisp, professional, devoid of any identifying regional accent. The general removed a pen and wrote 6 numbers followed by 4 letters on his notepad, then held it up to the phone's camera. Calm, precise, no hesitation. The operator didn't ask his name, didn't request verification. She simply replied, "Transferring. Please hold." A series of clicks followed, then silence. He closed the phone and returned it to his pocket, his expression unchanged as he settled back against the hard plastic bench to wait. At window 6, life continued. Number 128 was called. A teenager with oversized headphones slouched forward, driver's permit application in hand. Officer Reeves leaned against the counter, still amused by the previous encounter. "You see that old guy's card?" he asked Melissa, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Betty forged it to get senior discounts or something." Having sensed the climate, a few people in the nearby queue chuckled uncomfortably. An older woman glanced toward the bench, and then quickly away. Melissa smiled thinly, unlocking her phone during the brief lull. She opened Reddit, fingers already typing a post for /entitled people. Old deaf guy tries to use expired military ID at DMV. Totally fake. Probably printed at home. The security officer shut him down. She attached a blurry partial image of the ID she'd surreptitiously snapped, careful to keep the man's face out of frame to avoid trouble. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The general remained motionless, watching the proceedings with quiet detachment. Then a call came through, not to the public line that rang constantly throughout the day, but to the administrative line in the back office. Rarely used. Unlisted, Brenda Wallace, regional administrator for the Department of Motor Vehicles, picked up on the second ring. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Not a single employee heard her side of the exchange, but they all witnessed what followed. Brenda emerged from her office with steps so brisk they nearly qualified as running. Her typically composed face had flushed to a deep crimson that spread down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. She didn't look at the old man on the bench, didn't acknowledge the waiting customers. She walked straight to security, finger pointed directly at Officer Reeves. "You," she snapped. "And you," turning to Melissa, "my office. Now." The abruptness silenced the entire lobby. Even the electronic chime seemed to pause momentarily, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere. As Reeves and Melissa followed their superior through the secured door, a black SUV with government plates pulled up outside the main entrance. 2 men in tailored suits with American flag pins stepped out, adjusting earpieces as they surveyed the building. The older agent, silver-haired and stone-faced, entered first. He scanned the waiting room with practiced efficiency until his gaze landed on the elderly man still seated patiently on the bench. He approached with subtle deference and signed with practiced hands. "General Mitchell, sir, we received your request for assistance." The General Mitchell, looked up with the faintest hint of surprise. He signed back, didn't make one, just reminded someone I'm still breathing. The second agent positioned himself near the door, hand casually touching the bulge beneath his jacket as he monitored the room. On the other side of the security door, raised voices carried through the thin walls. Words like classified and authorization and security clearance filtered into the lobby. The door swung open again. Officer Reeves emerged, face drained of all color, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. No smirk, no authority, just the stiff movements of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "Sir," he began, approaching General Mitchell. "I didn't realize." The general held up his hand, stopping Reeves mid-sentence. He pointed his ear and shook his head, then wrote on his notepad, "And no, you didn't, or couldn't." The room had transformed from bureaucratic tedium to breathless theater. Conversation ceased. Phones lowered. Eyes tracked every movement between the suited agents and the elderly man they addressed with unmistakable respect. The older agent produced a leather portfolio and extracted a folder stamped with recognizable federal markings. "We brought everything you'll need, General," he signed, simultaneously speaking for the benefit of others. "Fast-track renewal authorization, official apology from the Department of Defense liaison, and escort orders for immediate processing." General Thomas Mitchell accepted the folder with a slight nod, but made no move to open it. 37 years of special operations had taught him that documents were often the least important part of any interaction. The security door opened again. This time Brenda Wallace herself emerged, followed by a visibly shaken Melissa. The regional director's professional composure had returned, though her complexion remained unnaturally flushed. "General Mitchell," she said, voice pitched slightly higher than normal, while awkwardly attempting to sign what few words she knew. "If you'll come with me, we can process your renewal immediately. I've cleared my personal office for privacy." The general wrote on his notepad and showed it to her. "And oh, I'll wait my turn." Brenda blinked, momentarily thrown. "Sir, after what happened..." General Mitchell interrupted by raising his hand. He wrote again, "What happened was a misunderstanding. I've had worse." A single dry smile crossed his face, the first emotion he displayed since entering the building. Those closest might have glimpsed something in his eyes then, not anger, something deeper. Memories of places where misunderstandings had consequences measured in blood rather than embarrassment. "But your schedule, sir," the younger agent pressed. The Pentagon indicated. "The Pentagon doesn't dictate my afternoon," Mitchell wrote firmly. He gestured toward the electronic display overhead. "Number 142 is next. I'm 151. I'll wait." The DMV staff exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared contradict him. Brenda nodded stiffly and retreated to her office, the agents taking positions near the general's bench. Officer Reeves remained frozen, caught in the impossible space between apology and escape. "Sir," he finally managed, voice barely audible, "if I had known who you were." General Mitchell looked up at him with piercing blue eyes that seemed more than most could imagine. He wrote carefully, "You'd have treated me differently. That's the problem." The message was simple, the lesson profound. For the next 47 minutes, General Mitchell waited like any civilian. When 151 finally flashed on the screen, he approached window 4, not the director's office, and submitted his renewal application to a wide-eyed clerk who processed it with trembling hands. The suited agents remained nearby, their presence transforming the mundane government office into something that felt vaguely classified. Whispers spread. Phones discreetly captured images. The story was already forming, though none present knew its true dimensions. As General Mitchell prepared to leave, ID properly renewed, he paused beside Officer Reeves, who had maintained his position by the security desk throughout the ordeal. "Officer," he wrote on his notepad and showed it to Reeves. Reeves straightened involuntarily. "Yes, sir." General Mitchell removed his updated identification card, holding it briefly visible. He wrote again, "Next time you see this badge, stand or step aside." He didn't wait for a response, simply returned the ID to his pocket and walked toward the exit, the agents falling in to step beside him. At the door, he turned once more, addressing no one in particular and everyone at once. He removed his notepad one final time, and wrote in large block letters that the agent held up for all to see. Respect isn't about recognition. It's about remembering that some of the most important work is done by people whose names you'll never know, carrying identification you won't recognize. The agent read the general's next note aloud. That ID you laughed that was issued at Fort Bragg in 1984. The signatures on it belong to men whose names most history books don't remember. Not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much to be written down. A young mother clutching renewal forms pulled her phone out, recording the moment. I lost my hearing and voice in an operation in 1997. The agent continued reading from the general's notepad. In a country that officially never saw American boots on its soil. The room grew impossibly quieter. I carried that ID through 3 conflicts you never heard about, in 7 countries that wouldn't acknowledge I was there. When it expired in 2012, I was operating where American credentials would have been a death sentence. He adjusted his suit with the precise movements of a man accustomed to creases and alignment. The agent's voice carried the general's written words with appropriate gravity. I can't speak, but I can still serve. I can't hear, but I listen more carefully than most. My disabilities are my weakness. They became my strength in places where silence was survival. A veteran in line stood at attention, his example quickly followed by others who recognized the moment's significance. The ID you mocked represented not just my service, but the service of countless others who worked in shadows so deep that even their families never knew what they really did. With that, he exited the building, disappearing into the waiting SUV as quickly and quietly as he had arrived. Behind him, Officer Reeves sank into a chair, already knowing his career wouldn't survive the day. At window 6, Melissa stared at her phone, at the half-written Reddit post still open on her screen. With a shaking finger, she deleted it and closed the app. Some stories, she realized, weren't hers to tell. By dawn the following morning, General Thomas Mitchell had become an unlikely internet sensation. The young mother's video had been uploaded, shared, and amplified across social media platforms. Without context, without background, millions watched a silver-haired man with a notepad deliver a lesson in quiet dignity. Pentagon defends dev veteran after DMV mockery, read one headline. They laughed at his expired ID. Then the Pentagon proclaimed another. A cropped photo captured General Mitchell leaving the building, flanked by the suited agents, his weathered profile half turned toward the camera. Something in his expression, resolute, experienced, unimpressed, resonated across generational and political divides. Veterans' networks exploded with activity. Retired service members recognized elements of the situation that civilians miss entirely. They humiliated a living legend, wrote a former Marine on a popular forum. The type of ID he described isn't issued to ordinary personnel. Even generals walk carefully around those badges. 30 years in shadows, another commented. 4-star generals wouldn't dare mock him. These are the ghosts who made our visible victories possible. By noon, the Riverside County DMV released a terse statement announcing personnel changes and procedural reviews following an unfortunate incident. The public recognized corporate damage control when they saw it. Officer Mark Reeves submitted his resignation by email, effective immediately. Melissa Chin was reassigned to the county archives, a position that required no public interaction. Brenda Wallace survived professionally, but would spend the next 3 years implementing a comprehensive training program titled Recognizing Special Clearance Veterans and Respecting What You Don't Understand. General Mitchell himself never commented on the incident, never acknowledged a viral video, never sought the spotlight that briefly illuminated decades of shadow service. 3 separate journalists attempted to locate him for interviews. All 3 received the same response from Pentagon Public Affairs. No comment on the individual in question or the alleged incident. But something changed in that particular DMV branch. Something subtle yet undeniable. The bench where General Mitchell had sat remained unmarked, no plaque, no special designation. Just an ordinary plastic bench in an ordinary government waiting room. Yet employees noticed that people rarely sat there anymore. When they did, it was with a certain awareness, a certain reverence, as if the space itself had been transformed by brief contact with extraordinary service. The security staff, now under new management, established an unwritten policy. Any military ID, no matter how unusual, received immediate supervisor attention and respectful handling. 6 months later, an elderly woman with trembling hands presented an equally unusual identification card at window 3. The clerk blinked, recognized something in its format, and immediately requested supervisor assistance. Within minutes, the woman was escorted to a private office for processing, treated with a deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. If General Mitchell ever returned to the Riverside County DMV, no one recognized him. Or perhaps they did and honored his preference for anonymity by looking the other way. But the bench remained in the unspoken rule that came with it. If he shows up again, let him go first. Because some IDs may expire on paper, but the authority, the sacrifice, the service behind them, these things become permanent parts of our national memory, whether we recognize them or not. Some respect isn't given. It's earned over decades in places we'll never know, doing work we'll never fully understand. We honor not just the visible heroes, but also those who serve in silence. If this story touched you, please comment with respect to honor those whose service remains in shadows. They may not hear our words, but they deserve our recognition.